so many fantastic questions. Just, I was saying to Brooke and Melissa the other day, I was like, just reading the questions was cathartic because I was like, oh, I'm not alone. I'm not the only person that has these fears or desires or anxiety moments. So thank you all for submitting questions in advance. I think it really helped Melissa shape the conversation. And she was like, man, I could go on forever with these questions. So it will really help us fill the time. And I'm going to ask, just so everyone knows, a few ground rules. Everyone is muted. Please feel free to use the chat feature in the Zoom if you have any questions. We're going to open it up at the very end if there's time for everyone to kind of ask some ad hoc questions, but feel free to go in, one by one and add comments or questions that you have in the chat as Melissa's going through, because I know for me, sometimes a question pops into my head and then I'm like, oh, I got to write that down quick so I don't forget. But we will be answering those questions towards the end of her presentation. So I'll just kind of take it away. Welcome, Melissa. Melissa is a local sleep consultant who's been in the field for over 10 years. And she works with both babies and children and families who are looking for sleep consultants, and as well as families with special needs. And the beauty of the pandemic kind of allows us to work locally and globally. So she's been a wonderful resource for people all over the world. And we're really excited to have her here with us today. So I am going to hand my screen over to Melissa. Give me 1 second. You'd think I would be really savvy with this, but this is my first time putting this together. So here we go. Hold on. Let me get her going.
I think we're good. I think I can actually.
You're gonna take over?
Let me see. Can everybody see my screen?
I think I gave you that ability, so I think I can. Okay. I can see it.
Cool. All right. Okay, great. Well, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. And I I got the questions that you all shared, and they're fantastic. I can't wait to answer them. And I am not going to give you a big long introduction about me because I just want to make sure we have plenty of time to get to everything. Now, as Julia mentioned, I am a sleep consultant here in the Philly area. I will clear the air. I do primarily now work with kids with special needs, but obviously for me to know what kids with special needs or neurodevelopmental issues needed, I needed to know what a typical child needed with regards to sleep, how the methods worked with them. So, in the last 4.5, 5 years that I've worked as a sleep consultant, I've had the pleasure to help a lot of families in that Chestnut Hill area in Philly with their young babies and toddlers as they go through all the changes and the throes that happen with sleep. So this is me. This is me with some of the kids that I work with. Now, my primary work, I work with kids with special needs. I am a therapist, and it was in that work, it was one of the reasons why I got into sleep consulting, just because every single kid here that you see in these pictures was a child that I was working with at some point who was super exhausted. I wasn't getting anywhere with their therapy programs. And when we deviated away from therapy, we got the sleep all handled and sorted, we were able to do so much more, with the kids, which is, what I'm here to share with you all today. Now, we all know that getting a good night's sleep, obviously, when we wake up the next day, you feel refreshed. Chances are you feel a little happier, all those things. But for me, as a child brain developmentalist, sleep is incredibly important for brain growth and development. We can all talk about how important stimulation opportunity is for kids in those first 6 years of life, but one of the very commonly, I guess, not spoken about elements when it comes to brain growth and development is sleep. And that's when the brain is processing information, organizing it, it's doing spring cleaning. So for those first few years of life, when a child is just a sponge and they're taking in everything and they're growing and they're developing, making sure that they're getting adequate sleep at night is crucial. And of course, like I said, it helps to restore energy. You're in a better mood. It helps to boost immunity. Kids who sleep better tend to be able to fight off flus, colds, infections, all of that much better. It helps to reduce hyperactivity. There's hormone balancing that happens. Kids are physically growing more. And just overall, from a health standpoint, from a learning standpoint, making sure that your child's getting adequate sleep at night is crucial. Now, I do want to just kind of go over with everybody. Oh, okay. So just a little bit about the methods that I work with. When a family comes to me and their child is not sleeping well, getting good quality sleep, of course, the first thing I teach them is just how important it is for brain growth and development, which I just spoke about. A lot of what I teach my families is encouraging independence in sleep. And that's just because time and time again, when a child really is able to develop their own self-soothing strategies, they don't need mom or dad to make that happen. That quality of sleep, middle of the night wake ups, early mornings, all of those things get significantly better. And that's just because the child at that point, they have it in their toolbox. They know what they have to do to get to sleep each and every night. And of course, we all have our own ways of doing it. Whether you have to lie on one side, your arms have to be in a certain position, you have to have a particular pillow propped up to make it happen. All of those are our own internal strategies. And of course, if in the middle of the night, someone were to take your pillow and blanket away and you woke up in the middle of the night, you would not only be a little perturbed as to where those things went, but the first thing that you're going to do is get out of bed, look for your pillow and blanket. And that's a very, very similar thing that most of the kids that I work with are going through each and every night. They need mom or dad in some way, shape or form to get to sleep, whether that's rocking, holding, patting, just having, mom sit in the doorway just to make sure everything's okay. So with my methods, I encourage that independent sleep in the most gradual and successful way possible, not only for the child, but for parents as well. Of course, we focus on sleep hygiene. So what's the right time to go to bed? Lights, screen exposure, all of those things, bedtime routine, all of those are key elements in making independence happen. And of course, with my background as a child brain developmentalist, I will talk to parents about physical activity, sensory things, nutritional changes that may just make things a little bit easier at nighttime. Because from time to time, I'll have a family where the kid is independent and there's just something just doesn't seem to be clicking. Like the sleep is still very fragmented, whatever. So sometimes talking about that physical activity, nutrition, whatever, can really help move things along. Okay, and of course, the most important thing is for me, parenting is, in my opinion, probably the number one most challenging but most rewarding job that you could possibly have. And I know, especially in this day and age when there's thousands and thousands of things that you could read online and those parenting Facebook groups, all of those things, like it can feel very disempowering when you don't have a handle on your child's sleep, if they've been struggling with it over and over and over again. And it can feel like a very lonely place to be in. Like is my kid the only one going through this? So for me, as a sleep coach, I want to empower parents to say, look, you can make significant changes. You can figure out how to handle these things. And with every family that I work with, my goal is to end things off where they know exactly what they have to do, exactly how to handle all those potential troubleshoots down the line, so that they don't feel lost and that they've got the confidence moving forward, that they know what they have to do. And, sometimes that just means initially you got to have somebody there to tell you, hey, what you're seeing right now is totally normal. It's okay. Let's just keep going. Or maybe to say, well, that was a little unusual. Let's make this adjustment. So, my goal is to teach parents what they have to do, what to look for, and more importantly, have the knowledge moving forward that they know how to handle those things and the confidence to do that as well. Okay. So that's just a little blurb of what I do. Now, I don't want to spend too much more time on that. I know we have a ton of questions to get to. So I've had a chance to kind of look over everything, and I'm just going to go down the list of what I have. And of course, if those of you who submitted questions, if you're here, if you have any follow-up for me, like Julia said, feel free to put it in the chat box, and I'll be happy to follow up. So I got this question a couple times, and again, I'd like to clear the air with this one. A couple parents asked if I was a proponent of the cry it out method, and how do we comfort a child or a baby when they're frustrated and they're upset in this process. So my answer to this is no, I do not advocate for cry it out in any way, in any way. Frankly, it's not fair to the kid. It's not fair to parents. I know there are some parents out there who have gone ahead and they've done it and they've seen success with it, but most of the families that come to me who have tried it, it did not work. And it felt, again, very disempowering because they couldn't handle the issue of their child's sleep. So no, I do not recommend cry it out in any way. And of course, if you're changing something in your child's sleep that has been there for a few weeks, a few months, or since day one, you can't just rip the rug out from under them. It's not fair to anybody. So ultimately, my methods are gradual in the sense that parents are more present at first, and slowly, as the child is more successful and they've learned, okay, all right, they got this level, they've got up to this level with the process, then we gradually phase parents out of the room. Now, what I will say is that in all my years of doing this, I've done this in more expedited ways. I've done it in the most gradual way possible. Regardless of how you go about encouraging sleep, independence with sleep, or getting your child, working on those middle of the night wake ups, chances are at some point there are going to be some tears. And that's just because you're changing what your child has been used to for a really long time. So the way I explain it to my families is like, if I came over to your house and said, all right, well, now sleeping on your kitchen floor is the best thing for sleep health and hygiene. We're going to do that. You probably wouldn't cry, but you would make it very well known to me that you are not happy with the change. But as we did it more consistently, and as your body and brain started to predict those patterns, it becomes easier and easier. It's more comfortable. So ultimately, with the kids that I work with, there may be some crying initially, but if parents are consistent with the plan, they're comforting in the ways that they can, where it's not too much interaction, that crying exponentially comes down. I mean, within the first 3-4 nights, it really is not much of an issue anymore. But of course, every kid's temperament is different. And we have to keep that into consideration as well. Okay. Yeah, there, and of course, there's a couple people here asking like the difference between babies and toddlers. And of course, there's a totally different way of interacting with them. And I realize that we have mostly 18 month to 4-year-olds here. So, you know, obviously we can't ignore them. We want to recognize that they're frustrated, and with the right amount of comfort, basically what you're saying to your child is, hey, I'm here. Everything's okay. Maybe I'm not giving you exactly what you want right now, but I'm here. There's nothing to be worried, upset about. Let's get to sleep. Okay. So of course, the way that you interact with your child depends on their age. But you know, it's all a matter of, like I said, just kind of knowing your child's temperament and knowing when's just enough without giving too much attention, and what's just enough where you're not ignoring what they're trying to communicate with you. Okay. So I hope that clarifies those couple of questions. Okay. All right, perfect. So the first question I have here, is, I think, probably a little apropos given the last year. So our 3-year-old was great about bedtime for a while, straightforward routine, could leave while he was still awake. Since the pandemic, we've started sitting next to him until he falls asleep, which drags out bedtime. It can be very and it's a little nerve-wracking because this family is also expecting another baby in a few weeks. So what I will say is, you can imagine in the last year, I've heard a lot of since the pandemic. I think if you're thinking about that 3 to 4-year-old, a lot of things have changed. Like in that year, all of a sudden, everybody's home, mom or dad are there at their disposal all the time. Then all of a sudden, everybody's going back to school, back to work. Like it's a lot of shifting around. And you know, for us as parents and as adults, we want to prepare kids in the best way possible. But when things were changing from week to week, there's only so much we can do. So I suspect here what you're seeing is that with the pandemic and with those changes of like people being home, not being home, it's probably just kind of arisen like, I just really don't want to be alone. And, you know, he's probably figured out at 8 o'clock or so when you're starting bedtime, that's when he can really get your attention. So, and it's something that can happen really quick. It could just be 1 or 2 nights where you're sitting in the room when they're really distressed. And then it's like, boom, all of a sudden your 3-year-old saying, well, this is how we're doing it for forever. Right. So this is a very common thing to happen at this age as well, just because understanding wise at 3 years old, your child becomes the expert negotiator and deal maker, and it just kind of comes with the territory. So I will say, if you're here now, I will say the good news is that you can go back to the routine. You just need to be consistent with what your expectations are moving forward. So if that means that you really don't necessarily want to have to keep sitting in the room for them to feel safe to go to sleep, there's ways of doing that and ways of preparing your child so they know, all right, they're not necessarily sitting here, but it doesn't mean that people are going to go away. I'm okay. There's ways to encourage that. And some of the things that I've done specifically since the pandemic are, number one, we actually, for all of my kids at this age, we do a social story about, this is what happens at bedtime. This is where mom and dad are going to be. This is where child's name is going to be. And this is how, you know, if we wake up in the middle of the night, this is what we're going to do. And just having that outline is a game changer for these 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds. That's what they need. They just need to know, all right, what am I supposed to be doing right now? What's expected? What are mom and dad going to do? And having that visual and that little social story can outline that really well. And you can go back to that as many times as needed throughout the day, to keep reminding your child of that. Now, the other thing that I've I've done since the pandemic is I've actually started to do structured alone time during the day. So even for kids pre-pandemic who were totally fine, playing on their own, being by themselves, all of a sudden with what's happening at nighttime and being very clingy, needing mom and dad sitting there, doing some structured alone time during the day gives them some information on how to be alone so they can use that knowledge and information at night. So basically what this looks like is you have you have a couple of sessions a day, maybe like 2-3 minutes at first, not a whole lot. And you tell your child, okay, you're going to read books, draw, color, play with your Legos, whatever. Okay, while mom is going to, and you tell them exactly what you're going to do. So you lay it out very clearly during your alone play time. You're doing this, mom and dad, or dad is doing that. And then if the time is 3 minutes, set a timer for 3 minutes. And if your child comes to find you, you walk them back and you say, hey, remember, you're supposed to blah, 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 and I'm da, da, da. Okay. After 3 minutes, if they've done well, then quiet time is over. You move on with your day. And very slowly you increase that. Now, we're not looking for like a whole heck of a lot of time. We're maybe talking about 15 minutes or so at one go. And I realize that for this age group, sometimes you can't leave them exactly for 15 minutes before they get into something. So, but again, what you're encouraging here is you're encouraging confidence in them to say, you know what you have to do. This is where you're going to be. This is where I'm going to be. And that information, little by little, can really help with that all of a sudden kind of clinginess you're seeing with nighttime and going to sleep. Okay, so some of these daytime activities will have very good ripple effects with what's happening at nighttime. But again, I think really the key thing is just if you've decided like, okay, we really can't sit in here anymore, the important thing to remember is that he was able to do it at some point. He can do it again. It's just a matter of like being really black and white with him to say, okay, this is what to expect. This is what we're doing. And incorporating some of those activities during the day can be really, really helpful. Okay, so next question. What time should my 4-year-old be going to bed? Okay, so this is a great question. And actually, this kind of is applicable to all the ages represented at ECC. Okay, so whether 18 months, 4 years old, I generally recommend a bedtime between 7 to 8 o'clock. Okay, and that's just because in my experience, that's when I see my kids tend to wind down. That's when their energy is at their lowest, and you want to take advantage of that window of opportunity. So right now, if your child is struggling to stay asleep for long stretches, they're waking up early in the morning, naps are starting to get a little wonky, one of the first places and best places to start pinning things down with the schedule is around that bedtime. Now, of course, there are some outliers. There are some children I've worked with where 6:30 is their window, or they have something a little bit later. But I would say 18 times out of 20, probably, maybe even more. It's usually between those 7 to 8 hours and 7 to 8 hour. And when you take advantage of that, you're really kind of you're listening and you're acknowledging what Mother Nature wants. Like Mother Nature is making your child's energy dip around that time. And when you hit that window of opportunity and that earlier bedtime, again, it's much easier for them to fall asleep. Things are kind of working in sync with each other. So multiple nighttime wake ups almost automatically will start to come down. And if, like I said, if there are any other unusual scheduling things you're seeing during the day with naps, early mornings, that is a very good way to start remedying it. Now, I know that many parents will say, well, if we get to bed earlier, doesn't that mean they're going to wake earlier? And that's just not the case. Usually within 3 to 4 days of making that change, my kids are going to sleep better, extending their mornings almost without any other intervention. It's just make the bedtime earlier. And of course, the added benefit to this as well is, if your kid's getting to bed at 7 to 8 o'clock, it allows you to have a little extra time at the end of the day for yourself, to be with your partner, whatever. So I think that question, I know it was framed for a 4-year-old, but honestly, for everybody here, for all the age groups, that's a pretty standard window for the bedtime. Okay, so the next question is there an advantage or disadvantage to one sleep when sharing a room with a sibling? And what I would say is that there's no advantage or disadvantage in the sense that it really just kind of comes down to matter of preference. Some kids tend to be lighter sleepers. Some kids tend to make more sounds at night. So you have to weigh those things with the two siblings. But I've worked with many families where, for space reasons, out of kids' preference, the kids are sharing a room. And if ultimately, if that's what's going to be the setup for a while, it's actually better just from the get-go to encourage that. That way your children get used to sharing that room together. Every once in a while, when I work with a family, sometimes we'll have to separate for a little bit just to work on independence, and then we get everybody back together again, and it goes off without a hitch. I remember once when I first started, I had a 3 and a 6-year-old, and I decided, because of all the shenanigans that were going on in the middle of the night with like getting into parents' bed 10 times and back and forth, I decided to separate the kids, and things just weren't going as successfully as I wanted to. And at one point, the 6-year-old was just like, I just want to sleep in Noah's room. So we put them together, and then boom, like that was it. So, again, there's no advantage or disadvantage. It's almost just kind of a matter of preference and what physical space you have for the kids as well. All right, perfect. So next question. Okay, so we think we've hit a sleep regression, and it's brutal. And I know, I'm sorry, sleep regressions are a toughie. You got this. It'll be over soon enough. So the question here is, how do I keep my 3-year-old napping at home even though she naps at school? How do we get her down at night without power struggles? And of course, you have a sleep training clock, which is great, but she's not staying in her bed in the morning. So any and all of these topics. All right, we'll talk about it. So to kind of give you a short answer on this, a lot of times, many kids that I work with, they will kind of look at napping at school or daycare and napping at home or sleeping at home as two totally separate things. So it's not uncommon for me to see where 5 days a week, the kid is going down great for school with the teachers, like they get their 2 hours, whatever, no problem. But then on the weekends, it's like a disaster. And what I will say is that chances are the root of some of the issues you're seeing around nap time is can probably be traced back to the way she's initially falling asleep for the night. So if you're noticing certain power struggles with going to bed, chances are, we're going to see that with the naps as well. So, obviously, I think it kind of depends on what things you're seeing. At this point with 3-year-olds, I've seen just about anything when it comes to power struggles and getting parents to sit in the room, lie down with them, all of that. So I think ultimately, probably what you're seeing with the naps at home can be traced back to what's going on at nighttime. So, and I think at 3 years old, that big leap developmentally is usually around understanding. And, like I said before, 3-year-olds, for all the right reasons, are fantastic negotiators. They drive us crazy, but they know exactly what our buttons are and know how to get what they want. And it's it's a survival thing. They need to know how to do that. They just, sometimes use it or abuse that ability, so to speak. So, I think that's probably, like I said, just take a very close look at what's going on at nighttime, how you're interacting with your daughter, like how is she getting to sleep? Is she needing any kind of help in any way? Chances are it's going to be found there. And I do want to remind everybody at this point too, like regressions are totally okay. They are a pain in the rear end when they happen. But it's a very good sign that things are happening developmentally. Okay. And honestly, you could probably Google search every month, every year, and there's probably some kind of sleep regression that you could find an article about or parents talking about. And it makes total sense. Like I said, I mean, the first 6 years of life, there's so much going on. There's so much learning. There's so much brain growth and development. Like it's just bound to happen. And of course, there are some bigger ones that we all know about, like the 4-month regression. But they can happen just about at any time. And the more important thing is just knowing when they happen, recognizing them, giving your child space to kind of work out whatever it is that they're learning, help them get their yayas out, so to speak. But there are going to just be times where the brain's like, no, it's 3 a.m. I learned 5 words. I got to work on this now. So you got to, just know in the short term, I know it's a real struggle and there's a lot of testing of patience and maybe not everybody's going to be sleeping great, but if you do your best to just kind of stick with the rules and the boundaries you've put in with your child, it will pass and it will just be a little bump in the road, really. How do you start to sleep in the same room? Okay, so just to go back to the room sharing question, Megan, thank you. I'm sorry I missed this. So Megan is asking, because she has a 2.5-year-old and now a 6-week-old, is there a good strategy for having them start to sleep in the same room? So Megan, what I would say first is, like, according to the American Academy of Pediatrics, like technically the 6-week-old should still be in your room at least for 6 months, up to 12 months. So this is not something you have to worry about, hopefully for right now, unless you've made the decision that you're going to put your 6-week-old in another room, which, ultimately I know some parents will make that decision, which is fine. So what I would say first is, for the 2.5-year-old, just start talking about how, new baby brother or sister is going to be in the same room. This is where the crib is going to be. This is how we're going to handle it. You may have to stagger bedtimes a little bit, and chances are the 2.5-year-old is going to go down earlier than the 6-week-old at this point, because the 6-week-old, I suspect the sleep, they're still probably taking 4 or 5 naps a day. Bedtime might be a little bit later because of that. Now, I know a lot of my parents whose kids room share, they will use like a white noise machine, stuff like that, which, can be helpful, but sometimes it doesn't always mask, like, the younger one hooting and hollering and crying when they need to eat or something like that. So I think, Megan, the more important thing is just when it's time to start making that move, maybe like a week or 2 beforehand, you start talking to the 2.5-year-old and saying, all right, this is the crib. This is where it's going to be. Your brother and sister might wake up and they might be a little fussy, but everything's okay. Mom and dad are going to take care of it. And explain why maybe the little one is waking up to cry. Obviously, feeding is probably number one. But it might be that there's some gassiness, they need a diaper change. So, like, go through all those possibilities with the 2.5-year-old. And 2.5 is young, but there's understanding around that, all of those things. And I think the more clear and the more communicative you are about the move, that ultimately should not go off with a hitch, as long as things are going well with the 2.5-year-old sleep. Okay, perfect. All right, so let's see. Next question. Okay, what to do when my child is scared in the middle of the night and won't go back to sleep in his own bed? And there's a few questions here, so I'll answer that one first. So obviously, we all know what it's like to wake up from like a nightmare or something startling, whether it's, thunder and lightning outside, anything like that. So again, we don't want to ignore those fears and those worries, but at the same time, we have to be careful that it really shouldn't be a nightly occurrence. And if it is, chances are it might be actually a sign that a child might not be getting enough sleep. But I think as long as you have the same protocol each time, so like if they wake up and they say, "Oh, I'm scared, this happened," you say, "Thank you for letting me know. I'm really sorry that happened. Now let's, I understand and I see that you're really scared by that dream, that thunder. What I'm going to do is, walk them back to the room, put them in bed. Maybe you stay there a couple extra minutes. And then when things seem to calm down, then you say, okay, it seems like you're doing really well. I'm going to go to my room. Okay. And I'll come check on you, if needed. Okay. And sometimes and maybe that protocol doesn't necessarily work for you and your family, but as long as it's the same thing every single time, your child's going to start to pick up on like, okay, well, at least they acknowledge that I'm scared, but it's not eliciting the reaction that I want. So maybe I should just stay in bed. Okay. So a lot of these different things that we're discussing, it really just boils down to being consistent, following the same thing each and every time. Julia, you said, what about bringing a crying child into your own bed? Yeah, I think you have to be very careful with that because, and obviously that crying could be happening for a number of different reasons. Like it could just be one of those nights where they wake up and just have a terrible nightmare and you just can't console them. It might just be that they're really, really sick. And I think these moments are going to happen, and I get it. Like at 2:30 a.m., the first thing you want to do is just get back to sleep, get your kid back to sleep. So like one of times, it's not going to make or break things. But I think honestly, like if it's happened 2-3 nights in a row, then maybe you should be saying, maybe we've got some like boundary things going on here. And that's when you just you do those very gentle, like kind of resets with them. And you always say, I understand that you're really scared. I can see that you're scared. So you're mirroring their emotion, but then you're kind of bringing it back to the boundary of saying, but we're going to go back to our bed now, or your bed now. Okay. And that, for like, honestly, I mean, I've started to implement that more and more and more over the years. And it's a game changer in the sense that kids are like, oh, okay, well, at least they see what I'm feeling and how I'm, that dream really did scare me or whatever. But like I said, if we're kids who are starting to use this more as an excuse, chances are intuitively you kind of know, like, all right, did you really have a nightmare? So it's a good like middle ground of like, all right, well, at least let's acknowledge the emotion around it, but let's like stick to what we've been doing here. Now, I know there were a couple parts to this question. So you also asked, how many hours should a 3.5-year-old sleep, more or less? And again, this age group of 18 months to 4 years, it's more or less the same amount. And I would say at this point, you're still looking for anywhere between 11 to 12 hours of sleep a night. Now, again, there are always outliers to that. And depending on how much your child is napping during the day, that can also affect it as well. But on average, we're looking at 11 to 12 hours. And I can say from like my own personal experience, like the first kid I ever did sleep training with was my own 3.5-year-old nephew, Liam, who would not fall asleep until 11:30, woke up at 4:30, and it was just like party time. And when I learned about sleep training, my sister was like, you gotta help me, please. And she, like, it had gone on for so long, she had actually convinced herself that Liam was a genetic anomaly that only needed like 6 hours a night. But within 3 weeks, we made adjustments to the bedtime. We put some of those boundaries into place. And within 3 weeks, he was sleeping 12 hours a night. And I was actually just talking to her last weekend about his sleep, and he's 8 now. But she was telling me that he still goes to bed at 8 o'clock and is waking up around 6:37. So that, I mean, that just kind of tells you right there exactly how much kids should be getting. And like I said, he's 8 and a half, well, 8 and a half now. So yeah, it's really important. Now, you also mentioned another great question here about temperature. So like sometimes, you mentioned your son is either too hot, too cold. He'll kick off blankets, then wake up and ask to like have them put back on again. So this is a great question. So the first thing I would recommend is just make sure that the temperature of the room is low, but not too low. So usually I recommend trying keeping it around 67, 68 degrees. And of course, if he gets too hot, he's got to do what he has to do and kick off the blankets. But if it's starting to become something where like more consistently he's asking, hey, I need you to pull the blanket up. I need my blanket. One really helpful activity is actually during the day, do a mock of how do I pull my blanket up. So like maybe you toss the blanket in between the wall and the bed and you say, okay, like we're going to pretend that we just woke up. We got to find our blanket. So that way he gets a little practice with it. That way he's less and less likely to ask you to keep coming in. And this was actually something I had to do with a lot of my kids with special needs, because actually like motorically, they weren't able to bring their blankets up, but they would kick them off and it would be like 4 or 5 times a night, that they would be stuck. So I started doing this with more and more kids, and I've done it with a few like neurotypical kids as well. And it's just, as long as they have the practice, it's kind of there in their muscle memory. So it should happen less and less. So if there's anything like that that's coming up, you can always mock it during the day and practice it there. And honestly, for 3.5, you probably do it 2-3 times and it's like, boom, they got it. So yeah. Okay. All right. So we have a question here. All right. So this came from a parent of a 2-year-old. So how do we keep our toddler in her own bed all night long? She falls asleep fine, but seems to wake up scared and refuses to go back to sleep unless she's in our bed. Okay. So, all right. So similar, to kind of mirror some of the things I've talked about already, I think ultimately it kind of boils down to parents saying, all right, nope, this is my limit. Like, we're just not doing this anymore. And I think even at 2 years old, it may take a little longer to process and there may be more protest around it. But if you have a consistent strategy to say, all right, you've come into our room, we're walking you back, you're in your bed, this is what we're doing, then we're out. That can be really helpful. But I think also, sometimes kids will fall asleep fine, but they may still need that help there. So I'll see this a lot with even older kids. Like parents will tell me, oh, my child falls asleep fine, but they keep waking up in the middle of the night to look for me. And sometimes it even just boils down to, at the very beginning of the night, they need mom or dad sitting in the chair, sitting in the hallway or sitting on the floor next to the bed until they fall asleep. So even if it's not like they need that physical touch, and that could very well be the case for your 2-year-old. But ultimately what you're seeing in the middle of the night often is a reflection of what's happening initially, even if initially things are off to an easy start. So just, I think you want to keep that in mind. But like I said, just having that consistent, nope, this is how we respond to it. This is how we're going to handle it over and over again. Very often that's enough for the kid to see, all right, that's mom and dad's limit. I understand now. That's all we're really teaching them. Okay, so I I got a couple of nap questions, and actually, funny enough, I talked about this on Instagram yesterday and on my Facebook page. So, um, at what point do children stop needing to nap? Do they lead the way on that transition, or do you best keep to encourage naps until some particular age? So, look, what I have learned in my experience is that typically, when it's time to cut naps completely, that usually happens around 3 years old. So maybe a few months before, maybe a few months after that, but around there. But it does not mean that you necessarily have to cut the nap. Okay. Because some kids will just hold on to that afternoon nap much longer. So if if he's still consistently taking a nap in the afternoon and nighttime is on track, like he's getting good sleep, waking up rested, there's no need to pull it. Now, sometimes there are needs that come up, like, they start pre-K or something like that, and the school just doesn't offer nap time. So then you might have to pull it kind of forcibly. But otherwise, you do want to follow a kid on that. And basically, what you're looking for when it comes to dropping a nap completely is that at least 4 times a week, your child is just flat out not napping. So they might do like some quiet time in their crib or their bed, but they're not falling asleep. So either you'll see that a few times a week, and or nighttime starts to become a really big issue. Now, you have to be careful with this as well, because sometimes it'll be time to cut a nap, and a few nights a week, it's like taking more than 30 minutes for them to fall asleep. It's a big struggle, a lot of protest. That could be an indicator, but that same indicator could also be overtiredness as well. So you have to be careful with that. And you don't want to confuse the two. I'll admit, like, even for me, sometimes it's hard to know, oh, is that overtiredness, or are we looking at a scheduling issue? So what I recommend to parents is, if you're thinking about changing the schedule in any way, dropping a nap, stopping naps completely, wait 2 weeks. See what you see for 2 weeks, write it down, and then make your determination based on that. Okay. But those are usually the telltale signs. Like 4 times a week, they're basically not napping anymore, or nighttime starts to become a real big issue out of nowhere. Those are usually the signs you're looking for. Yeah, and there were a couple of similar questions to that. So yeah. Okay, so all right, so the next question we have here is about early mornings. So my son wakes up between 4:45 and 5:30 every day, regardless of what time he goes to bed, how much sleep he gets in the night. He seems to be waking up full of energy all day long. So how can I get him to sleep at least a little later? And I hear you. I hear you loud and clear. So the first couple things I would check first are, number one, what's the light level in the room? Okay. Now, I know a lot of parents sometimes will, like, even eye roll at this, like, oh, okay, we got the blackout curtains, like it can't get any darker in there. But some kids, even the tiniest little sliver of light can cause those early morning wake ups. So what I would recommend is that if you have that blackout curtain, make sure that you actually cover up the windows as well. Where my husband and I live now, we live right behind a hospital. So we get like insane amount of light pollution coming into our room. So we have a blackout curtain, but I've also taken like brown paper grocery bags, and I've puttied them over our windows as well to keep the light out. And that, for the most part, does a really great job. So again, even the tiniest little sliver of light, I know it sounds like really nitpicky, but that, I've seen so many times, can be the difference between those 5 a.m. wake ups and sleeping until 6:37, or like a chronic 30-minute napper, and then like, boom, all of a sudden it's 2 hours like that. So you want to check for that. The second thing, at this age, you want to be seeing, what are they expecting in the morning? Like that can be a really sneaky one. So, sometimes those early morning wake ups are happening seemingly just because the child starts to understand, oh, when I get up, mom and dad take me out of the room and then we do dot, 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 dot. So sometimes I'll talk to parents about this and they say, yeah, like I want to get back to sleep myself. So like, I just, give them the tablet for a little while, or we come downstairs and we turn on the TV and I give them some of their breakfast, just to kind of keep everything else quiet for everybody else in the house. But the problem with that is that it's kind of opening the door to, like I said, they're starting to understand, oh, if I wake up early, this is what happens. And again, to go back to my nephew when he was 3.5, this is exactly what would happen. I mean, my sister was just so exhausted that she would turn on the TV, give him a snack, and then, he had all of his toys there. He started to play. So like there was a little bit of reteaching around that as well. Now for that issue in particular, and I know we had somebody who mentioned they had a sleep training clock. A sleep training clock can be really helpful with reestablishing what the new morning time is. But you got to be consistent with it as well, because sometimes parents will be like, oh, it's like 5 minutes until the green light goes on. They almost made it. Let's just go for it. Like, just take them out. But what the kid learns at that point is like, oh, well, I've got this sleep training clock thing in here, but like, I mean, it's supposed to turn green, but I didn't see it turn green. And then, things become gray. So you got to make it like super black and white with him to know, all right, this is the new morning time. So if he wakes up anything before that, you gently bring him back in the room. You remind him it's not time to wake up yet. Your clock isn't green, or whatever clock you have. So that's also a possibility. And then of course, finally, like if all of those boxes are ticked, it's going well, like there's nothing that he could possibly be waking up for, you may just be looking at, he doesn't need as much sleep, and that's okay. So if that's really the case, really exhaust those first two things first. And then very slowly, what you can start doing is just adjusting his schedule by 15-30 minutes later until he's waking up at a reasonable time. But kids are it's really interesting to watch this, because I've seen some kids where we'll make that adjustment, we go 15 minutes over, and then all of a sudden things get worse. Like mornings get earlier, wake ups get worse again. And that is the body and brain telling you like, nope, no, my window was 15 minutes ago. Let's not go over that. So if you start to see anything wonky like that happening again, then don't change the schedule. He just may be an early riser.
Hey, Melissa, I'm just reminding you that there are about 4 minutes left in the conversation before we hit an hour. I know we have a little bit of extra time at the end, but I know you have a hard stop soon, so I just wanted to give you that heads up. Thank you to everyone.
Great. Thank you.
And chatting and all these good questions. We did have a question about pacifiers and self-soothers.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's a great question. So pacifiers for the first few months of life can be okay, but they can be a little bit of a gray area too, because for some babies, they do need that just from a soothing, from a sucking standpoint. And I know with regards to SIDS, the AAP says that infants should have that pacifier soother to reduce the risk. But if we're talking about this age group, 18 months, 3 years old, 4 years old, not only just because of dental reasons, but it can be a very sneaky little sleep prop. And depending on how dark it is in the room, how good your child's manual abilities are, if they go to sleep with the pacifier and then they can't find it, like they're going to keep waking up and looking for you to help them to get it back. So first few months of life, if they're needed, absolutely, you can use them. But just keep in mind that it can become a prop fairly quickly. And especially at this age, like you really don't necessarily want to keep encouraging them. So I usually start like with some reduction of time with the pacifier during the day. And we actually at this age, I'll have the kids put their pacifier to bed. So the pacifier goes to the same place in the house every single night. So the kid knows, okay, it's there. Now I go to sleep. All right. And it takes a couple nights to like get them used to it. But I've seen some of the most pacifier bottle reliant kids, like within 3 nights, know, okay, that's where it goes. It's there until morning and they're good. And many times when you start that, like as you start to reduce it during the day and as you start to like put it to bed at night, a lot of kids just drop it altogether. Quite naturally, like they just decide on their own, like, okay, it's there, it can stay up there, I don't need it right now. So yeah, that's my thought on it.
Great. I know we had another question about potty training and how that affects sleep when you're going through that.
Yeah, it's and again, from my experience working with kids with special needs, very often parents will come to me like trying to do both sleep training and toilet training, and it's a lot of changes at first. So I think if, personally, what I would say is that like if you're looking to work on potty training with your child specifically around that nighttime, but there's a lot of maybe like boundary pushing, there's not a whole lot of independence with sleep, I would focus on that first, get them independent, get the like kind of some rules down around middle of the night. That way they know what to expect with the nighttime toilet training, because many kids obviously figure out very quickly, like, oh, if I say I have to go potty, it's like all hands on deck, like everybody drops everything. And the last thing we want to do is we don't want to like have that happening like 3, 4, 5 times a night, because I've seen that as well. I've had a lot of 3-year-olds who will just be like, I need the potty, and it's like, you went 3 minutes ago, we got to go to sleep. So that would be my recommendation around it. Like maybe you can definitely focus on daytime toilet training, but to get nighttime training going successfully, their sleep has to be a little bit more independent, and the rules around getting out of the room and stuff like that have to be pretty clear too.
Great. We are right at 1:00. If
Okay.
anyone has any last questions for Melissa while she's still on, please go ahead. I'm gonna just unmute everyone right now just to see if anyone wants to chime in. Hold on 1 second.
I did get a quick question here from Don about his 6-year-old. He said, what you're seeing with head banging, that actually can be a self-soothing thing. It doesn't look very comfortable to us, but I do have a small group of kids who will do this, and you really should just leave him to it. Like at a certain point, he's going to figure out like, this doesn't feel all that comfortable. So he'll eventually drop it. But for right now, there's really not a whole lot you can do to intervene. Sorry. Okay. Now I'll leave it up.
That's always an interesting one when kids decide to do that. It's yeah. Let's see. Hold on. Nicole says, thank you. This was so informative. Oh, suggested moving from out of the crib. So like moving from your big girl boy bed from crib to big bed.
Okay. No, that's it. That's a great one. And I think somebody else had also asked this question in the list. And what I would say is that there are a few things you have to ask yourself first before making that transition. Because very often parents will make the transition thinking it will fix certain issues around their child's sleep, but it actually, things kind of stay the same, or you have that honeymoon period where it's like, oh, okay, it's been a couple weeks, it's going well. And then like, boom, all of a sudden they're back to their usual routine and song and dance or whatever they do in the middle of the night. So I think with this question, it's important that your child does have to have a certain understanding of like, this is what's okay, this is what's not okay in the middle of the night. And like, if they're coming like periodically just to check or say I had a nightmare or whatever, like that's fine. but if it's something that's happening consistently every single night, I would hold off on making changes from crib to bed, because what happens is as soon as you take away the crib, a 3-year-old realizes in 2 seconds, like, oh, there aren't 4 walls now. Like I can easily leave my bed, and that becomes an issue. So I think that's really kind of like, that's the most important thing. Do they have some independence going to sleep at night at least? And are the rules around bedtime and middle of the night, like, are those fairly consistent? Now, of course, there are other things that go along with that, but that really, in my opinion, is the biggie. And do they have like more or less a kind of consistent schedule with their sleep? Now, when it's time to make the transition, I encourage you to get your child involved. Like maybe they get to pick out the new set of sheets for their big bed, or they get a new pair of pajamas to celebrate the occasion. And then when it officially happens, there's going to be adjustment time to that as well. That it is a new bed, even though they're probably in the same room. And there may be some times where they're like, oh, okay, well, if I leave my bed, what happens? So there's going to be some testing there as well. So again, as long as your response to it is neutral and it's the same thing each time, they're going to learn very quickly, like, oh, okay, well, that didn't work. I guess I should just stay in my bed. But I would say it usually takes probably a week or two to make sure that like things are really going well with that transition. So if in those first couple of weeks things are a little off, that's okay. That's to be expected. And Julia, I have like a little blog post about it, so I can also send you that link to share with people if they need it.
That's great. Thank you. All right, everyone, anything final? Because I know Melissa has to bounce. Thank you so much for all of your wisdom. We really appreciate it. And we'll be sharing the recording along with follow-up questions and I know you had a flyer that was really helpful about daylight savings time, which is a big one coming up. And we'll share your social media handles around so everyone has that. But thank you again. Also, your contact information if anyone wants to reach out to you independently. I know your services are available. So really appreciate everyone for joining. I am going to share some really last minute announcements with everyone. And Melissa, you're welcome to stay or leave, whatever you need to do. Let me just figure out what I'm doing. Hold on. Okay, goodness. There's too many screens.